I'd like to call the meeting to order. As we gather this afternoon, I would like to acknowledge on behalf of Council and our community that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the First Nations. We would like to thank the Algonquin people and express our respect and support for their rich history. We are extremely grateful for their many and continued displays of friendship. We also thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. And a moment of silent reflection, please. Please stand.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command.
Car ton bras sait porter l'épée, il sait porter la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits.
God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
And Mr. Kelly, if we could have roll call, please. I'm sorry? Oh, Ms. Dombrowski, I'm sorry. Jeez.
Thank you, Warden, and good afternoon. Councillor Bennett,
Present.
Councillor Brose,
Present.
Councillor Doncaster, Councillor Donahue,
Here.
Warden Emo,
Present.
Councillor Giardini,
Present.
Councillor Grills, Councillor Yon,
Here.
Councillor Lynch,
Here.
Councillor McKenzie,
Present.
Councillor Mayville,
Present.
Councillor Murphy,
Here.
Councillor Nicholson,
Here.
Councillor Service,
Here.
Councillor Watt,
Present.
Councillor Weir,
Here.
and Councillor Wilmer.
Present.
Thank you. We have quorum.
Thank you very much. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? Seeing none, thank you. And at this point, we'd like to have a mover and seconder for a closed meeting pursuant to Section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended for the purpose of A, litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, official plan amendment number 40, Storyland Pit, and B, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board, and in brackets, transitional housing. So a mover, please. The member from Laurentian Hills, seconder, the member from Bone Shore Valley. Discussion? All those in favor? And Councillor Watt, could you just say yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. It's carried, thank you. And if all of Thank you. We're back in open session, and with that, we'll move to item number 8 on the agenda and the corporate services report. Mr. Burke, please.
Thank you, Warden, and good afternoon, County Council. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to spend an afternoon discussing this important topic, our asset management plan and our long-term financial plan. So again, why are we here and why is this important? So as part of our strategic plan, the first item on our strategic plan is to update our asset management plan and long-term financial plan, which you'll recall were struggling post-COVID to match the realities we were seeing. So it was definitely time for an update. Also, we have a legislative or prescribed deadline in Regulation 588.17 of having an approved asset management plan that contains service levels for all assets approved by County Council by July the 1st of this year. As well, just to point out that I don't want to give you the impression this is a exercise in ticking a box that we need this, so let's approve it. This asset management plan and long-term financial plan is very important to help you make informed decisions. It allows you to properly consider the long-term implications of your, construction plans or your current year budgets by putting them in that frame of 10-year planning horizon. What does this do to us next year, not just what does this do to us this year? So, how did we get here? Last November, Mr. Foss and I spent an entire day on this topic with all of you. And we talked about how we got to our starting point and the things that had changed from the original asset management plan. And at the end of the day, we came away with the consensus that we would have to reduce our service level standards by a little bit and increase our funding by a little bit. And that would allow us to maintain our asset management plan and achieve what we wanted to achieve. Last month, we did those revisions and we brought this forward to committee, the F&A committee and the operations committee. And it was decided that this was a discussion that had to involve all of County Council. So that's why we're here today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hanrath.
Thank you, Daniel. So the first question we're going to bring forward is what about growth? As County Council is aware, our current asset management plan did not take growth into consideration. It is for replacing or rehabilitating our assets more or less as they currently are laid out in their current geometry. However, we are aware that a number of municipalities are growing and our assets not growing with them can be an impedance. Two such occasions are the realignment of Daniel Street intersection with Galvin Street in the town of Arnprior. We were able to contribute to that initiative, however, it was another case-by-case basis. So what we're looking at is a solution that can be used going forward in these cases. So, as I said, we'd like to move away from the case-by-case basis, and what staff is presenting today or recommending today is an infrastructure expansion policy, which allows local municipalities to plan for inclusion of works in the county's asset management plan, sets consistent responsibilities for the cost of those works, and stops impeding growth going forward. And a caveat to that is the creation of a growth reserve to pay for the expansion of these assets, which Daniel will discuss a little further. Thanks, Dina. So the infrastructure expansion policy is meant for transportation infrastructure because these projects that are in these growing municipalities have a mix of infrastructure, not just county infrastructure in these right-of-ways. For instance, local municipalities are responsible for water infrastructure, sanitary infrastructure, pedestrian infrastructure on these county roads. So this policy has been drafted in such a way that the municipal act, it follows the municipal act in breaking down who's responsible for what whenever these projects arise, and helps staff as well as the local municipalities be able to plan for these projects well in advance. Part of planning for those projects well in advance is circulating our asset management plan, which we already do on an annual basis to the local municipalities, and allowing the municipalities to be able to propose changes to the scope within the plan. For instance, on Murphy Road, the county had planned on a pulverize and pave in that location because it was a rural cross-section, and we worked with the town of Petawawa in order to urbanize a section of road from Petawawa Boulevard to Woodland Crescent, or urbanization to Doran Road, but project to Woodland Crescent. In a case such as that, if we followed this policy, the breakdown of costs would be similar. However, we would have required notification of such a change at least 3 years in advance so that we could project the required adjustments needed in our asset management plan in order to facilitate it within our current long-term financial plan. This is another instance of a case-by-case. However, we'd like to follow a similar formula for cost sharing going forward. And for changes that have a less than 50% cost increase to the county, we'd want about a year's notice in order to start the planning for that project. And in cases where the project wouldn't see a cost increase to the county, but involves some municipal infrastructure that local municipality would be responsible for the cost for, we would just need to know the January of the year that the project was planned. So as I said, the policy breaks down the responsibilities for costs on projects such as this, where there is shared infrastructure in the area. For the most part, the formula for the cost breakdown is following the Municipal Act responsibilities, with the one caveat being where urbanization of a rural cross-section road is being proposed. It puts more of the cost for the storm sewer installation, which is a large portion of the cost whenever it comes to urbanization. It splits that cost 50-50 between the two municipalities, the county and the local municipality, rather than the majority falling on the county in those instances. And the recommendation being presented today for the policy is that County Council approve the new policy, GA14, infrastructure expansion, and further that a bylaw to amend bylaw 5902, corporate policies and procedures for the County of Renfrew be adopted. And I'll pause there, Warden, to see if there's any questions about
Could I have a mover and a seconder? A mover from Arnprior, seconder from Bone Shore Valley. And with that, are there any questions, comments? The member from Amherst Bromley, please.
Thank you. First one is just for clarity. So there is not a purchasing bylaw at the County of Renfrew. There is bylaw 5902 that is an omnibus bylaw that simply enacts the policies. 5902 as amended frequently. I was going to say from time to time, but I think frequently. But I'm gathering that that encompasses myriad. We heard from Mr. Belmore this morning. I'm assuming it includes his policies, the procurement policy. There are distinct. I'm getting a head shake, actually, Mr. Chair, from the treasurer, so I would defer.
Mr. Burke, please.
Thank you, and through you, Warden. There are 14 core corporate policies, one of which, the first one is the procurement policy. Somewhat eludes me what the others are, but the items dealt with this morning, HR policies are specific to HR. These are the corporate-wide overarching policies, and this bylaw enacts 14 of those.
Okay, thank you. So for clarity, we actually have a procurement policy that is given standing because of bylaw 5902. Then following up through you, Mr. Warden, to Mr. Hanrath. So ultimately, the cost-sharing agreement, would it have any impact? I think all of council received the PowerPoint presentation in advance of today's meeting. So this is actually page 13, which is the 10-year projection of our capital. Is the shared service policy and how it pertains to infrastructure investment, does that have any substantive impact on our 10-year capital plan?
Thank
Sir?
you, Warden. Through you to the councillor from Madmaster Brumley. No, it does not. The way the policy is written now is that these local municipalities looking to participate in these projects would be paying for the portions of the project that they're responsible for.
Okay, thank you. And Township Whitewater, then Petawawa, please.
Thank you, Warden. Pretty clear in my mind. I just had one, just so I could understand the basis behind the recommendation for the 3 years notice. Is there an average dollar figure that we're assuming that you're using to say if it's greater than 50% of this average dollar figure, we need 3 years to include it in the plan? How did you come up with 3 versus 4 versus 2?
Mr. Hanrath?
Thank you, Warden. Through you to the councillor from Whitewater Region. There wasn't a lot of math put behind the 3-year threshold. It was just to give us time to make adjustments in the 10-year plan rather than having to make changes the year of. It also gives an opportunity if design work is required by a consultant, we could enact that in 2 years before and then finalize the design the year before and then move ahead with construction.
Okay, thank you. And I saw Petawawa.
Thank you, Warden, and through you. Just a comment and then a question. Thanks to the county and to council as well for working up to this point on a case-by-case basis when there are growth projects. And now that if this gets passed, I think it's a great idea to have a framework and a guideline for all of us to follow moving forward. It just simplifies everything and lays everything out so there's not a case-by-case basis anymore. We have a framework, and I think that's great. The question is minor versus major. I get the 50%. Should this be enacted soon, there are some roads that would be on the plan for next year. Should one of those roads be a 50% plus, we don't have the luxury of a 3 year. So what will happen if there are roads that are on the county schedule to be completed 2025, 2026, and they turn out to be an urbanization project that's above 50%, is that going to push them back in the schedule?
Mr. Hanrath?
Thank you, Warden. Through you to the councillor from the town of Petawawa. For a change of that magnitude, chances are it would push it out in the 10-year plan regardless of if the policy was in place or not, because you would need at least a year for design to be finalized in order to enact that, and an agreement in place ahead of the design going forward as well. Not saying it would push it out 3 years, but it would be pushed out a year or two.
Supplementary?
Supplementary, yeah, please. Can I ask questions on the bylaw itself? Okay. So 2.2B, which is on page, I'm not sure what page that's on, but it's 2.2B. Just a question on clarity of the wording. So this list has the county being responsible for the below portions of costs associated with the overall project. And section B says 50% of design of county infrastructure where consultant services are required for the overall project design due to water, sanitary, pedestrian, other infrastructure that is the responsibility of the local municipality. So just for clarity, that means if there's a project where a consultant needs to be hired in terms of all of the supplementary municipal infrastructure underneath, that the county would pay 50%, the municipality would pay 50%.
Through you, Warden, to the councillor from the town of Petawawa, that is correct. For the most part, on our county projects, we design in-house. However, where municipal infrastructure water or sanitary infrastructure is involved, we would hire a consultant for those, and we would split the cost 50-50 with the local municipal partner.
Okay,
Thank you. Any further questions? Whitewater and then Amherst and Bromley.
Thanks, Warden. And this, just because I have no appreciation, I haven't been exposed, but the Municipal Act defines the responsibilities. We're taking exception in one area for storm sewer infrastructure being 50% between two parties. how does that compare with what the municipal act would say? And why would we assume 50/50? I know you mentioned it was a significant cost. Is that the only reason?
Thank you, Warden. Through you to the councillor from Whitewater Region. So if we followed the Municipal Act, if you look at 2.2I, that dictates the formula for responsibility for storm sewer. We'd be responsible for any storm sewer for drainage of the county road, and the remainder would be the local municipality where we're draining their infrastructure. The reason for the 50/50 split is going back to our existing asset management plan. We plan for the replacement of what's there on a rural cross section where we're urbanizing, or where an urbanization is proposed. We wouldn't have urbanized as our current plan is laid out. So the cost of installing 100% of the storm sewer, for instance, or 90%, is so great that it puts a large impedance on our long-term financial plan and causes us to have to push more projects out in the 10-year plan if it were to come about. So the 50/50 share helps offset that to put more of the cost of the 50%, more of the cost of the storm sewer, on the growing municipality that requires it.
So if I understand your question, were you directing it to the curiosity of a specific section of the Municipal Act and wondering if we're in conflict, or was this the answer you were looking for?
No, he hit it nail on the head.
Perfect. Thank you. And I can't remember, Abbotston Bromley was next.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. This is on page 5 of today's agenda report, and this is the policy, proposed policy GA14. And in the paragraph just above the bold uppercase policy definitions, it says, County Council may, if deemed advisable, make exceptions to this policy, provided the exceptions do not alter countywide application of the policy. And I have no issues at all with the sentence leading up to the semicolon, but council has has no provision that this council can put in front. I mean, at the end of the day, council, any county council can do as it wishes, whether it is countywide or whether it is not countywide, and we do not have authority to bind any future. It would be ill-advised for a future county council to do so, but I'm only raising this because we cannot have provision that binds the hands of county council. So I would suggest that that second sentence simply be stricken.
Okay, Mr. Hanrath or Ms. Dombrowski or Mr. Kelly? Go ahead.
That can be accommodated.
Okay, and that settles that. So it would be as amended? Thank you. Any further questions, comments? Any of our friends from a distance? I don't see any hands. All right, so we have a motion, and it's as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? None? It's carried. Thank you very much. And Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Council.
Sorry, could I ask one question? I was furiously scrolling because I thought I had one, and I think it might show up twice. And I'm notwithstanding it's been approved, but just for clarity. So there is discussion here of sanitary maintenance holes and water main chambers that are also split costs, but the county does not have these infrastructure elements. So what is meant by maintenance holes and chambers? Because those would be meant to, sanitary and water main are exclusively meant for the local municipality.
So Mr. Burke? No, sorry, Mr. Hanrath?
Thank you, Warden. Through you to the Councillor from Madmaster and Brumley. It's only split in instances where they have to be adjusted because we're doing road works. So if we're going through and raising the elevation of the road slightly and they need to be adjusted, we share the cost 50/50 with the local municipality.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and thank you through you to Mr. Hanrath.
Thank you. And Mr. Burke, please.
Thank you, Warden, and thank you, Taylor. So carrying on, so Taylor has just described one half of our problem with our growing infrastructure. How do we come up with our growth projects? And the answer is our newly approved policy. they come from you, the lower tier, with the notice periods. So now the other half of the question is, of course, how do we pay for them? Because they're not in our long-term financial plan. So this idea of the growth reserve is designed to collect the revenue from new builds, the property taxes on new builds, new assessments, increased property values due to actual changes in property, not MPAC reassessments. And these are the things that are driving our need to expand, right? These new houses are part of the reason why we have to expand. So therefore, we would collect the revenue from those into a single spot, and we can use it to pay for those increased costs. The idea that growth pays for growth, a fairly common concept in our industry, but new to the county of Renfrew. So what is our growth? So last year it was 3.06%, which is an incredible growth number. If you remember, that 3% compound, so that if we maintain that, it would mean a doubling of the weighted CVA for the county in 25 years. In 25 years, we would be unrecognizable to what we are today if that rate of growth continues, double the size. But historically, it's been a lot lower, about 1.5, which would account for about $850,000 of revenue, give or take. So depending on what projects come forth from our infrastructure policy needing expansion and what those costs were, this $850,000 a year, give or take, may or may not be enough to pay for that, but at least we'd have something. That would be the pool that we would look to use to pay for our projects coming out of that infrastructure expansion policy we just approved. And with that, the resolution is that County Council approve the creation of the growth reserve and that contributions to the growth reserve equal to the weighted current value assessment growth revenue for the 2025 year be included in the draft 2025 budget.
Thank you. A mover, please. Councillor or member from North Dakota Wilberforce, second by member from McNabb side. And now discussion. Member from Boncher Valley.
Thank you, Warden. What happens when MPAC comes in and reassesses and our CVA is off the charts, yet we have to lower our tax rates? What happens to this reserve? How do we mitigate?
Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Ward. So the MPAC reassessment process is quite separate and distinct from the actual assessment of new growth. So we do have a mechanism from MPAC designed to separate the reassessment changes from the actual valuation changes. And so when there is a reassessment year, the property values swing around quite dramatically, but we discount all of that when we look at new revenue, right? We only focus on actual property changes. And the reassessment will certainly shift the burden of taxes from one class to another, from one municipality to another in a two-tier system, but we will only focus on the actual growth. So reassessment or no reassessment, we will still have growth revenue and we will be able to separate that from any other existing property taxes.
Supplementary?
Sorry, I don't think I phrased that very well. Yes, I understand the difference between real growth and I'm just happy to hear that you have a mechanism by which this isn't going to create undue workload on staff members on our local tier or this tier trying to figure out what is what it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Member from Deep River and then from Greater Madawaska.
Thank you, Warden. You can hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry. Okay, I'm in a conference room with a new system. So what happens with the real growth revenue And I can only do this with an example. So well, I don't have to specifically example. The real growth revenue comes from municipality A, but there's no growth pressure. So the money is put into the growth reserve. There's no county growth pressures on municipality A. The growth pressures are going to fall under municipality C. So the revenue is going to come from one of our municipalities that, well, you know exactly what I'm saying. So how does this work?
Mr. Burke, please.
Thank you, Warden, for the question. It's a bit of a loaded question, but it works exactly as you say. The one municipality is paying for a project inside of another municipality, which is what we do all the time as an upper tier, right? We take from the collective whole and we spend where we deem it required, which may or may not be in the municipality that is bearing that relative share of the cost. Right? We don't just collect upper tier property taxes and only spend that portion in that municipality we take it from. We pool it into our collective revenue and spend it as county council directs. Yeah, and the burden and benefits shift from one municipality to the next depending on the year.
Okay. A supplementary or?
No, but just a comment based on that is the fact that all things being equal, on all of the services that the county provides to all the lower tier municipalities, the only thing that's significantly disproportionate is the county road system. There are many municipalities, because we fund the lower tier municipalities are funding the county based on assessment. They're not being based on lane kilometers of county roads. There are many municipalities that have 40, 50, whatever, 100 kilometers, maybe not 100, but 40 or 50 kilometers of roads. Most of the road network are county roads, whereas there are other municipalities that provide a significantly larger share of the county revenues, but don't have as many county roads. So this policy of reserving growth-related revenues into reserve for growth-related expenses makes sense, but it makes the county road system even more disproportional across the county.
Yes, it does. In some ways, though it also has the nice benefit of those municipalities. You have odd ones that are growing with very limited county involvement in their requirement for new roads. But most of the time, those municipalities that are experiencing the highest level of growth, to take the easy example, Arnprior, high levels of growth are also the ones with the highest need for expanded services. And the two, most of the time, align quite nicely, actually, with each other. There are exceptions and odd ones, but that is one of the nicer things about these two mechanisms working in tandem, is that where the growth is the one that's paying for it, but also where we're mostly spending the money. So they do go together relatively well, though of course there will always be exceptions where we're taking, taxpayers are in one end of the county are paying for a service in the other that they would see almost no benefit for. That's part of the problem, I guess, of a rather large geographic county.
Sure, Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, and I think part of the conversation to be had is when we get to budgeting, and Mr. Burke will correct me if I'm wrong, is when it comes to a project that council considers in a budget year, we will consider it coming out of the budget or the growth reserve, and then council at that time will make a decision to say, we're going to work on road or project X, Y, or Z, and how we're going to fund it is going to come from the reserve. So at that time, council may or may not choose to say, that town doesn't deserve to get it out of growth, this town does instead. Right, so there is a mechanism afterwards for I'll call it a fail-safe, I guess, if you want to call it that, for council to consider all growth-related projects and whether their growth should be funded from that reserve or some other mechanism.
Okay. Okay, thank you. The member from Greater Madawaska is gone, so No, he's gone. He had a council meeting at 3.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, he sent me a text. And so with that, I think I saw Whitewater, and then I see Edmiston Bromley.
Thank you, Warden. I appreciate the approach, and I think it's a novel way for us to carve out funding we're already gathering. We're just designating it for specific decisions. So I can appreciate that, and I think, you know, and we've had these discussions already between the Arnprior example and the Petawawa example, where we are literally impeding the development of these communities by being unable to have a mechanism to support that growth. So I think this gives us that opportunity, and as the CAO said, we can always, year to year, review aspects of it, which to me is the perfect, it gives us the freedom, yet it's designated and recognized as an area we want to invest in. So not really a question, a statement.
Good, thank you. We like those. Member from Edmiston Bromley. Jesus. Michael has an announcement in 5 minutes.
The warden has much more power imbued in him than I was aware. Thank you very much, Mr. Warden. On the query from Councillor Doncaster, I would suggest there are other areas besides the road network, public works. All of us have seen the heat map of paramedic responses. I would suggest to you that that is uneven, and there was a pretty significant cost would have to be borne to have that all the same color right across the county. So there are pros and cons in different areas, and quite frankly, we've already been using growth, but we've been applying it to our extant infrastructure. That is part of our long-term financial plan that we assign directly into our TCA reserve, the funds that come from real growth. And certainly I recognize that there may be a lengthy conversation on DCs, and my intent here is not to preemptively go to there, but my question is more germane to, so the projection is that the growth, I think if it was to stay at 3%, would raise something on the order of $850,000 in 2025, incrementally increasing from that unless we would see substantial change, or perhaps if we saw a return to more traditional growth pattern, would be less. The challenge for me, and I'll have, I can pass on to council, this is on page 10 of the PowerPoint presentation. It is the lower slide. And perhaps if the screen could be turned to the lower slide on page 10 as well, Mr. Burke. It is the charting, and it shows the blue revenues that would be anticipated from development charges. And even when we discussed the development charges, they still were not going to fund the then roster of, there it is, the then roster of growth-related projects. And setting aside for now, I'm given to believe that there is certainly some inclination towards expanding that roster, whether we end up with DCs or not. But ultimately, Watson and Associates said on the roster that's in front of us now is about $56 million in real growth. Now, it's somewhat difficult because they were establishing that over 13 years, not 10. This chart is saying, even at that rate, there's a gap of $27 million. Now, this is projecting that over 10 years. At $850,000 from new growth, that's going to yield $8.5 million towards our $27 million need. So it's going to take 3 times that to meet the current roster, if in fact we have development charges. If we don't have development charges, we're looking at more closer to $60 million, potentially over 13 years. So let's back that up and let's put it back to $50 million. $50 million is $5 million a year. That's 10%, almost 10% on our 2024 levy. Our current levy is 57 million and something, I believe. So this is not the solution, and in fact, really it's only priming the well of the growth projects that are put forward. And that is what prompted my question of Mr. Hanrath, and I recognize the need, and I'm very pleased that Council has endorsed the cost share, but that's not going to impact this. We need to now begin to recognize how are we going to fund growth, and I recognize this is still outside of our long-term financial plan, because growth is not in that 404 million that we're now contemplating. It's on top of that. So the 850,000 isn't a relatively painless approach to it. It's only the first pinprick where the dentist dulls your mouth first before they jab the needle in there to freeze it largely. That's where we're at. Because ultimately, we are looking at almost a 10%, let's back it up, let's call it 8% growth levy. We're also going to be talking about this extra $3 million that we need to put in to be taxing for moving forward. That's another 5.2%. And then we have our operations, and heretofore in our long-term financial plan, it has been, we aim for 2%, but no higher than 2.5%, except 2024, we have a 4.8% non-union wage increase, and that's the benchmark that we've established for collective as well. I recognize that inflation and its impact on the formula that we came up with last year, we're in all likelihood going to see a pretty substantial diminishment from that. But as I'm going through this, I seem to be coming up with somewhere around a 12 to 14% annual levy increase. Now, we don't need to attack all of that right now in this question, but ultimately 850,000 towards, or 8.5 million over 10 years towards that 27 million if we have DCs, where would we be funding the gap?
Mr. Burke?
Thank you for that. That's not an easy question to answer, as I think you used a great metaphor, priming the well. So the 56 million that came from our development charges study was the list that was circulated 2 years ago, say. So I think there's, I'm jumping ahead, but I think there's some significant problems with that list in and of itself, but also with the infrastructure expansion policy as approved, we would be sharing more of those costs than we had envisioned undertaking ourselves under the development charges, right? The nominally 50-50 cost share. So the 56 million may not be as high as that. Then again, there might be more projects that we missed in the original list. I think the 850,000 is at the relative average 1.5% growth. So if we maintain growth at 3%, yes, we will have a lot more pressure on our existing infrastructure a lot quicker. We're also going to be collecting more revenue on it as well. Not to say that those two numbers will equal out. I guess to come back to the original question, where would the gap have to come from? There's only one taxpayer. It has to come from somewhere, but we don't have to maybe bite that bullet today with a rather more drastic change. And this would be the start of the process that would begin to put some money behind our growth plans.
Thank you. Supplementary?
So I would agree with you, or with Mr. Burke, through you, Mr. Warden, that we don't need to bite that bullet today, that it's not the entree, but it is on the dessert menu. We are not going to avoid biting that bullet. And that's what we're engaged in right now, is preparing for how we're going to fund both current infrastructure and growth for the next 10 years.
Yes, thank you. And I see Whitewater. So I'm sorry. Oh, so as an incremental thinker, we're slicing off the little pieces, and yes, we still have a lot to do. So, Whitewater, please.
Thanks, Warden. I just wanted to respond to Edmiston Bromley. I see a very meager dessert that we still have to figure out how we're going to piece it apart. But for me, the decision at this is how do we analyze or how do we group our funds or our resources to make that decision? And I support recognizing growth as something that we need to fund in addition to maintaining our current assets and taking care of operations. There are three distinct elements here. How much we put in them, what that plan looks like over 10 or 13 years, that to me is a separate debate, but I think at this point, I believe that dividing your desserts into three different piles is where we need to go at this point in time.
Thank you. Any other comments? So with that, I'm sorry, the member from Laurentian Valley.
Thank you. I guess the question I have is, you mentioned just the current weighted assessment of growth for the 2025. What about the the supplementary or omitted assessments that will follow? Would you do calculations after the fact as well?
Mr. Burke.
Thank you. Through you, Warden. So yes, the mechanism by which MPAC assesses things is as they occur. So say you're building a building now and you complete it this month. So you would get 7/12 of this year's property tax bill as a supplementary bill, and next year it would appear on your growth list, what happened during the year. So it's, yes, those supplementaries during the year are captured. So when we talk about growth, we're talking about the supplementaries that occurred between the December 31st of the year we're in and the year prior. So that's kind of how we handle that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So with that, seeing no further hands, I'm going to, I'm sorry, member from Deep River.
Yeah, thank you, Warden. Just wanted to clarify that question, because do we not see supplementaries come in a year later sometimes?
Mr. Burke?
Yeah, depending on what happens, they could very well come in like 2 or 3 years worth of supplementaries in a row. This may be an overly optimistic assumption of how MPAC is on top of things, but that's the idea behind it, yes.
Okay. So with that, not seeing any further hands and speeding towards a resolution of this meeting, I'd like to call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? None? It's carried. Thank you. I just noticed the number of people yawning.
Thank you, Warden. It is a fascinating and attention-grabbing subject.
I'm on the edge of my chair, I'll be honest with you, and that's only after I found my phone.
There we go. So carrying on from, we touched on development charges. So the first two mechanisms, the infrastructure expansion policy and the growth reserve, will help decide the growth projects and help pay for them, though maybe not in their entirety. Development charges could run in parallel with those two items. They are, however, a very different animal. So they require a study identifying the projects which would require development charges, and then we calculate what we could charge for a development charge based on a rather complicated formula, apportioning the relative share to existing users versus new users. And they're collected at the building permit stage, not as an annual tax bill. So we have a background study that identifies $56 million in projects, and I think we mentioned that the project list, there's been some debate about its completeness, and people would like to add more or remove certain items. The background study would allow us to collect $33 million of that 56. That's what they're projecting. Because the project list that we have had no projects in about half of the municipalities, we had created two options or two thoughts for development charges. We could have a county-wide development charge, and we could have one in only those municipalities that actually contained projects from that development charge list. And so a reminder of the relative amounts. The county-wide development charge was estimated at $4,759 per residential build, and the area-specific one was $5,647 per residential build, so about $1,000 difference between those two options. And again, they alone, development charges alone, couldn't support the entire cost of those projects. They would cover about 3/5 if we collect them all. And we implement the maximum development charge we're allowed to. So again, we've heard that there's possibly issues with the project list for development charges. There's also possibly issues around the concept of having development charges in a number of municipalities. So the background study must be rolled into a full development charge study, and this is more time and more expense to go through this. If you would like staff to proceed down the road of development charges, the way forward is to refer this back into Operations Committee. We will seek again a revised project list and go forward from there with our consultant, Watson & Associates, and rebuild our development charges and bring it back here. Again, time and expense. So if there's no appetite for development charges and you would rather us proceed with the two policies or the policy and the reserve you've already passed, we could also let this development charge discussion lapse here and now and spare Taylor and I the expense and effort to go forward, and we can always pick this up later. So I guess to be blunt, this resolution is a prompt for what we would like to see continue forward. Do we continue down this path with development charges, or do we postpone it?
Okay, so with that, we look for a mover and seconder for the motion that County Council refer the development charges background study to the Operations Committee for the further study based upon a revised growth project list. Mover, Adamson Bromley, second, Petawawa. Discussion, please. Adamson Bromley.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. For a couple of questions. The first one is related to the Watson study. In my preceding question on the growth reserve, I believe that Mr. Burke was suggesting that the $56 million total amount that the Watson and Associates study had established was somewhat overstating the value, because some of that $56 million may in fact be borne by lower tier municipalities through our cost share arrangement that they had not anticipated when they put that together. Is that correct?
Mr. Hamrath?
Thank you, Warden. Through you to the Council from Adamson and Bromley. So whenever the cost estimates were put together for that report, most of them were viewed as an overall project. There may be some aspects that would be under the cost share policy, or the expansion of infrastructure policy, that would fall on the local municipality. It wouldn't be a huge percentage, but there would be some cost reductions in that regard.
Just on
supplementary?
On follow-up on that specific one then, it would be given to some variation. The $56 million is an estimate to start with. Perhaps it's more than incremental, but it is not substantive of the then projection of $56 million, correct? Okay. So then ultimately where I'm going, and I'm picking up on the same thread that I had broached in the discussion on the growth reserve. So the growth reserve at 1.5% is going to generate us probably, let's call it $9 million towards the $56 million. And that's still going to leave us $47 million to raise over the next 10-year period. Is that correct? And again,
Notionally, correct.
again, everything is notional. We're setting the path for the next 10 years. This is exclusively growth-related infrastructure that we have the potential to be raising that $4.5 million per year over the next 10 years, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And we also have $404 million uninflated on our current inventory. Current being a kind of a funny word, because since we saw this in November, there's $13 million that actually Mr. Davis was able to transfer to Mr. Perkins. Good on you. So ultimately we have that amount of money to raise as well, which is prompting, we're getting there as well sometime, of the additional $3 million, and that is a compounding $3 million. So by the end of the 10 years, I think it was something like $46 additional million required. For 2025 alone, that additional $3 million, again, on existing capital, is the 5.22%. So just want to make sure, as we're working our way through this, that I am presenting accurate information here.
Thank you, Councillor Donahue. Yes, that is the rather bleak situation we're looking at from our point in time now, yes.
That is my responsibility, Mr. Burke, to be the bleak agent in the House. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll go Whitewater and then McNabb side.
Sorry, Warden, I'd ask if Councillor Donahue could go back. He lost me at the 3 million and the 5.22. So just to make sure that I can stay in line with your line of.
So I recognize that we have not yet gotten there, but we are imminently going to be seeing that one of the recommendations, simply to fund our existing 10-year capital plan, would require us to go from the contribution to the TCA that we're making in 2024, that every year over the next 10 years we have to increase it incrementally by $3 million each year. So that for 2025 it must increase $3 million. For 2026 it must increase an additional $3 million. So now it's $6 million from where we currently are. And what I am saying is I have not extrapolated it over the full 10-year plan. What I'm saying is simply for 2025 alone, an additional levy of $3 million represents 5.2% levy increase, just to stick that in there. Then that's when I am adding to that the growth of let us say $4.5 million, which I haven't figured out the percentage on, but if $3 million is 5.22, $4.5 million would be a third higher than that, and we still haven't gotten to operations. This is still just capital. And I just wanted to make sure that all of council is fully cognizant of what these numbers are. And I recognize that, of course, and I'm very pleased to see in this report, and which will be part of the next 10-year long-term financial plan, that ultimately our year-end results and alternate revenue streams, et cetera, are going to impact this. But these are real and they are stark, and I don't deny at all that they are bleak, but I think it is imperative that we all clearly understand what the implications of these are. And I'm more than happy to take this offline if you wish, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. And McNabb Brayside.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I just want to clarify something again with Councillor Donahue and what I heard before. He mentioned the $56 million that we're grappling with, and he quoted the growth figures, but my understanding is that the $56 million is just for existing infrastructure, that this growth capital would be largely for projects that we don't have on the list yet. So I just want to make sure we're not double counting that. And I have a supplemental question after that one. if I
Okay,
may.
thank you. Mr. Burke?
Thank you, Warden. So development charges are a very different beast than the thing we talked about first, which was infrastructure expansion policy and growth reserve. And that the mechanism by which that would happen is, as Taylor pointed out, the municipality would tell us where they want expansions with the correct notice, and then we would have our growth reserve to attempt to fund it. Development charges, there is an overlap. They are possibly the same projects, but they are very different in that we need to know what they are up front. When you do the study, you estimate what your development charges are. In this case, the last time we looked, it was 56 million. And then you plan to fund that by extrapolating a development charge amount. So definitely the same type of projects, but with the infrastructure expansion policy, we don't need to specify what those are going to be out the next 13 years. We can attack, they would come to us with a notice from the lower tier. Development charges, you're somewhat locked to your project list as you picked it. You can make changes, but generally speaking, you're more or less locked to that list of projects.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So the growth-related fund, the previous one we were talking about, it's just for 1 year, that revenue for that 1 year would be applied to growth-related projects. Every year after that, it's part of the those revenues would be part of the existing infrastructure. Do I have that right?
Mr. Burke?
Yes, as it stands now, though I should point out that the resolution is just that we draft a budget in that vein, right? When we get to January, there may be other priorities, things may change, or as you suggest, we get to the point where the growth pressures are becoming so acute that we have to somewhat split our tax revenue, and that from the 2025 growth revenue and forward, we have one stream going into a growth reserve, and then we have our old existing revenue. So it could also be compounding as well. But at this point, all I suggest is that the 2025 weighted CVA revenue be contributed to the growth reserve in the draft budget, and we'll come to that discussion in January.
Okay, thank you. And Whitewater, please.
Good. Thank you, Warden. So I'll just offer two comments on DCs before we call for a vote on this motion. The first one is just when I take a look at that $56 million list, and I know it was drafted with the context of basically Lee Perkins' world. It's all roads, right? I'm interested in growth requirements for long-term care and emergency services. And, we've seen it already with cell phone towers and community housing. There are a lot of other aspects that the county will and need to grow in that aren't roads. And I take it roads are expensive and even more expensive every year after you have it. So yes, they lead the way, but it's that $56 million list. It's only including one aspect. And whether or not DC's applied all those different things, I appreciate that. That's a separate discussion. It's what are the areas we need to invest in order to support growth in our community? So the list, the 56 million, I don't think it's a correct list. And if we are going to talk about DCs, we need to have a good list that we want to make sure we invest in. And of course, assuming you have a good list, then you budget your top priorities until you run out of money. The second thing is just the two options that are before us. My thought is I'm in support of option one. If we're going to do it, if we're going to acknowledge that growth is somehow everybody, just like general taxation, then it applies equally to everyone, and not an option two where it's only a specific group of municipalities. So those are two comments for for council. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor from, or sorry, the member from Madawaska Valley, and then the member from Petawawa.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that Mr. Burke said at the beginning we have to make a decision whether we want to proceed with these development charges or not. I'm going to tell you from my perspective, we have no interest in proceeding with them. I could personally support option 1, but option 2 makes no sense for our community. You know, we did bring in a development charge, or tried to bring in development charges for our municipality shortly after the election, and it was turned down by council. And that development charge was far less than what the county is proposing. I look at the list of projects, and I know they can be reviewed and changed, but there is nothing that really benefits our municipality, and it would be a very difficult sell within the municipality. So for those reasons, no, I think, you know, development charges is not the route to go, and I would like to see if we can find other options. And thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're not quite at the point where we're going to make a decision on development charges. All we're doing with this motion is getting a more accurate list of what we need to fund, and then there'll be the conversation about development charges. Okay, thank you. And so with that, I had Petawawa, and then I'll go, oh, I'm sorry, supplemental, my apologies.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, no, I realize that, but at the same time, I wanted to make my position clear at this time.
Okay, thank you. Petawawa, and then Boncher Valley.
Thank you, Warden, and through you. And I understand that we're probably not the first upper tier municipality that's exploring DC, and that some may even have it in place. So my question is just one for clarity. Are the upper tier municipalities facing the same policies and regulations concerning DC that the lower tier municipalities are? So for example, a lower tier can fund certain things and certain things you can't. So like transportation, fire, parks, library, admin, water, wastewater. When an upper tier decides to collect DC, are they facing the same regulations, exactly the same, or are there different parameters?
Through you, Warden, yes, it would be exactly the same as the lower tier.
With the exception of wastewater and water. Oh, and library, yeah, unless we have, sorry, I was thinking of us. Unless the upper tier has it, my apologies, you're right. Boncher Valley.
Thank you, Warden. I was going down the same road as my colleague. I think when we saw that list from Watson, one of my frustrations was there were so many items on his list that did not come under the umbrella of the county, that there are local tier responsibilities, library, fire, water and wastewater, obviously. So I don't disagree with my colleague from Whitewater, but back to Mayor Wilmer's comment, I think that if we vote in favor of this, we're sending a message that we want to further explore. So I think his comment that at this time, he and his council have no interest in exploring DCs, even at the county level, then I agree, my council does not either, and so I will be voting in opposition to this even before we get to the idea of voting for option 1, option 2, or no DCs at all. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bromley?
Thank you. Just in synthesizing all of the comments around the room, there are a couple of things. Certainly, on Councillor Nicholson's suggestion, I'm sensitive to that. We are seeing pressures across quite a variety of the services that the County of Renfrew provides. If we were to add different sectors to this, that would eliminate option 1. There would be no, or maybe I have them reversed. There would be no, it would have to be DCs that would apply county-wide. The reason that there was at least a reasonable support or reasonable expectation on the roads is of having a more regional approach to DCs was the growth was happening in specific areas. And I know in actually watching some of the lower tier discussions of DCs, you know, the theme that was running through all of them is, why would our community pay for infrastructure, and this was exclusively roadway infrastructure and fleet, et cetera. Why would our community pay for growth that's going to happen in some other community? And it seems like a reasonable argument. And if we don't have DCs, that's exactly what we're all doing through the levy. That's where it will be going. My community, through our levy, will be paying for the growth that Councillor Service, Councillor Lynch are very fortunate to have. Increasingly, my colleague from Whitewater, there's substantial growth in Whitewater. That is where it's going to be funded from. If it's the levy, my community is proportionally paying whatever we're paying towards the overall county levy. The approach that I've taken towards DCs has kind of been, the people that are here now are the shareholders in our corporation. And if we're going to pay for growth out of the current folks, what's funny that the people that are moving in and becoming shareholders aren't contributing towards the growth that they're driving. And that has been why I have been in support of the notion of growth. Growth pays for growth. Any community that actually has DCs, and I believe Councillor Service, Petawawa has DCs, that is the mantra of development charges. Growth pays for growth. And even the province has begun undoing many of the things, more Ford recall notices on various planning issues. And there is a rationale for this to happen. Now, as I had said, if we are going to expand it beyond the road network, then everyone is going to benefit. If we are perhaps going to fund the next new car for the paramedic service, then Admaston, Brumley, and even the outer reaches, he's not here, Councillor Weir, or in fact even some of the more, I'll call them remote regions of Whitewater that were lighter colored circles on the heat map, we are going to benefit, and we must participate. But I think that that's why it is defensible and in fact supportable to further review development charges if it is pertaining simply to roadway, because if we don't have DCs, my community is going to be contributing, in my estimation, disproportionately. And the reason I say that is the gentleman that sat here, your predecessor, Councillor Service, in just an offline discussion with him on the DCs, I said, I get, if I have 12 homes built in my community in any given year, one of them definitely is impacting County Road 51 or the infrastructure in Petawawa. But I said, conversely, Councillor Sweet, if you have 100 new homes built in Petawawa, you have 100 homes that are impacting the infrastructure in Petawawa. So if all 12 of my homes are going to contribute towards that infrastructure, or Councillor Lynch's, then it doesn't seem equitable and fair. And that's why I think even with development charges, as Mr. Burke has been presenting here, there still be a supplement that is going to come out of levy, because I know my community is contributing towards some of those pressures, whether it be in Arnprior, whether it be in Petawawa. But I think it is at great peril, and that's why I was laying out the various implications for our levy. If we choose not to pursue development charges, these are real dollars that are going to have to be funded directly out of the levy, and I believe it is going to be uncomfortably high levy. And believe you me, I know from Admaston Brumley this year whereof I speak when I speak of uncomfortably high levy increase.
Okay, thank you. With that, you've heard the motion and the discussion. I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Oh, a recorded vote, please. Ms. Dombrowski?
Councillor Donahue?
In favor.
Councillor Bennett,
In favor.
Councillor Brose,
In favor.
Councillor Doncaster,
In favor.
Warden Nemo,
In favor.
Councillor Giardini, in favor. Councillor Yan,
In favor.
Councillor Lynch,
In favor.
Councillor McKenzie,
In favor.
Councillor Mayville,
In favor.
Councillor Murphy,
Opposed?
Councillor Nicholson,
In favor.
Councillor Service,
In favor.
Councillor Watt,
In favor.
and Councillor Wilmer.
Opposed?
And the motion is passed. 221 to, sorry, 176 to 12.
Okay, thank you.
27? Pardon me? So 176 to 27? 176 to 27, sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Warden. So our colleagues in operations will undertake that project and carry that forward.
Thanks.
So picking up where Taylor began his presentation about how the current asset management plan envisions replacing what we have right now with exactly the same thing. This is our current asset management plan. On November the 9th, we started with in today's dollars, a $413 million plan, and this notion that we should reduce some of our service level to save some money. So Taylor has come up with $45 million of, we'll say cuts, but more or less shuffling road projects further back into the plan, so your roads will degrade slightly more before they're repaired. As Councillor Donahue alluded to, we have added $14 million worth of structures that belong to the Algonquin Trail and the KMP Trail, which were never on our existing asset management plan, but as we do own them now, I'll say we own them, almost all of the trail, they should be included. We also have this unfinished projects brought forward from the 2023 year. That's just a timing issue where every year we have this. Some projects don't get finished in the year that they were budgeted for. We carry them forward into next year. We also don't use the funding in the year that they were budgeted for. We carry that forward as well. And then we have certain other adjustments that we've taken some time to review, totaling about 12 million, miscellaneous adjustments. The biggest one being the paramedic defibrillator, sorry, that's a hard one, replacement cycle being 5 years, not 10. So, that's about a $3 million change. And then where we change from our existing start point, our opening reserve balance at November 9th, we were projecting 42 million, 42.5 million. We have added a little bit to that from underestimated capital withdrawals. So again, those carry forward projects that we didn't need the funding, so we didn't need to take as much from our capital reserves. As well, we have a change to our estimated surplus. So any surplus earned inside the County of Renfrew is recontributed back into our capital reserves. So we start our plan with $48.5 million in capital reserves. And again, our spending is $404 million, say 400 over the next 10 years. Inflation adjusted, it's about 440. Relatively smooth progression. As always, the current year, or in this case, the next year, the 2024 year, is always the highest because it has those carry forward projects, the unfinished work from the prior year. And then we have that rather small list that breaks it, small printed list that breaks down by department and by activity where we plan to spend that. Again, the bulk of that is public works, by far and away the largest part. And what does your $400 million over 10 years buy you? So it gets you compliance with all legislation. If we have a legislation that we will maintain something to a certain standard, we will do that. It buys you a average road condition index of 70. That's an average, or sorry, 60, down from 72 where it is currently. Again, that's a reduced level of service to save money, but it will be a gradual reduction down to that level of 60 over a number of years. Bridges and culverts, again, a bridge culvert index stays the same at 68. That's 100 being a perfect culvert and 0 being no culvert at all. 68 is there. Then we move into buildings. So buildings are measured in FCI, which is Facility Condition Index, and it's the exact opposite of the PCI index, where 0 is a perfect building, and the higher you go, the worse your building is. And this is the only area where we have a target for our buildings, different targets depending on the type of building, but we have a target in Renfrew County Housing of an FCI of 10%. And our asset management plan won't get us there. We are, I guess, at a crossroads for our Renfrew County Housing Corporation, and currently we're undertaking the building condition assessments to determine how to move forward. But in the current plan, there is no renewal that would bring us in line with our target. We will have to wait for that building condition assessment and the fallout from that, which will likely involve spending a significant amount to re-upgrade our buildings or rebuild our buildings entirely. Fleet and equipment is, of course, measured on the good, fair, poor metric, and we are trying to maintain fair rated equipment everywhere, and our $400 million of spending will enable us to do that. So again, just a reminder that where we plan to save money is on our road target. So our average pavement condition index on that slow declining path from 70 to 60. So how will we pay for our $400 million over 10 years? So the first component is our debt strategy. So we are planning in this plan to debenture almost $49 million. And this would be 9 projects over 10 years. Mainly those projects with a cost greater than $4 million individually. There are some outliers where we've financed for other reasons, but that's the main criteria. Is the project greater than $4 million? We would make debt payments, so our debt servicing cost would be $48 million over the 10 years, so just slightly less than we were taking in proceeds. And that assumes a 3% interest rate and a 10-year repayment term on all debt. If we compare that to our annual repayment limit, so that is the metric imposed by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs to ensure you do not go too far into debt. You need their permission to exceed a certain amount of debt repayment per year. It's based on a calculation, and in the County of Renfrew's case, we'd be well below that. Not that you ever want to get to that point, but we'd be well below it. Possibly more relevant is the Ministry of Municipal Affairs produces a number of indicators based off our annual financial information return about levels of risk. And one of them is debt servicing as a percentage of total revenue. And they have indicators about where it's low risk, moderate risk, and high risk. And in this case, they indicate that a debt servicing as a percentage of total revenue greater than 5% is moderate risk, and greater than 10% is high risk. And so under this plan, we would stay within the low risk area. which is a good thing to stay on the low risk side. In terms of funding and grants, our projection is that we will take in an estimated $68.5 million in funding over the 10-year life of the plan, primarily consisting of CCBF, or the old gas tax, of $2.9 million a year. That's used in our public works road redevelopment. OCIF of $2.8 million. So that is also used in our road reconstruction efforts. And just to note that this year we did not get $2.8 million per year. We got 2.4. So quite a reduction on our OCIF, and we're doing some advocacy efforts around returning us to our previous level. And the other recurring funding we expect to see is $1.1 million in OPI and COCHI revenue, which comes for redevelopment of our social housing units. In those areas that are cost shared with the City of Pembroke, so paramedic service, long-term care, and social housing, if we were required to take levy dollars and contribute to our capital reserves, the City of Pembroke would have a share of that. And again, this would only be done when the reserves in those areas are exhausted. And it's estimated at about $5 million over 10 years. And then the big one, so levy contributions into our capital reserves. In order to fund this plan, we would have to rise from the 2024 contribution to our capital reserves of $19 million, and at the end of the plan be contributing $46 million per year. So that's a $3 million jump each and every year. As opposed to the old plan, which was predicated on percentage of total levy growth, I've somewhat simplified the equation by just targeting exact dollars. So this year we've contributed 19 million, next year 23, and on it goes. 22, sorry. But of course, as we know, every variable in this plan is subject to change. So these contributions could be reduced or increased depending on what you need based on increases in our funding and grants that we happen to receive, prior year surpluses, so something occurred inside of our operating budgets, and by default any operating surpluses contributed to capital reserves. So we would have an opening balance greater than we expected. We could reduce our required reserve contribution. Or the other item is, say you have another really big year of weighted growth, and you don't want to put all of that into your growth reserve. In the budget discussion, we could hive off pieces of it and use it to offset the existing infrastructure needs, as we've done for a number of years. So just to give sort of an illustrative example to how this would operate, is that in the 2025 year, in this long-term financial plan, it's planned to require $22 million of capital reserve contributions. As Councillor Donahue pointed out, that's a $3 million jump, 5% on its own on the levy, just in capital. But they could be reduced by an increase in the prior year surplus greater than, or an increase in the prior year surplus, so our capital reserves start the plan greater than we thought. We might have some capital projects that we had planned to spend money on but didn't quite get to. So we don't require the money. Again, it's reducing the requirement to have levy contributions this year, but also increases the expense into next year. So sort of a wash there. And then say we get a provincial funding announcement, that could also reduce the required levy. On the flip side, any of those things could go the wrong way and require us to increase our required capital contributions. And I've just thrown out a couple others, like increase in our inflation estimates. So our instead of our 2% inflation built into the long-term asset management plan, say it's 3, well, we need to start collecting more money to offset that. And if all things being equal, we have planned correctly, our capital reserve balance performs this sort of a U-shaped nosedive where it really tails off and then picks up at the end, and we have some reserves left at the end, but we have a really low point. This shape, this U-shaped sort of a dive in our reserve balance is part of our mathematics of the problem we face. Where right now we're spending more money on capital projects than we're actually putting into our reserve to fund those capital projects. So we always have this long, this rather sharp decline. And of course, to make up for that gap, we start collecting more in levy to try and fund that capital reserve. So our funding will match what we're spending. So towards the end of the plan, it always picks up and forms this U-shaped balance. In fact, there's the original 2013 U-shaped balance, always. This is kind of a mathematical construct that it will always show like this, where we're spending more than we're taking in, and we try to increase our levy to match it. So again, just to reiterate, due to the time horizon of the plan and the extreme changes that occur and the unpredictability of what's involved in the plan, each and every year we have to adjust our expense estimates of what we're spending on our 10-year capital plan, as well as our funding requirements. And with that,
So, thank you. So with that, I would need a mover and seconder for the motion that County Council approve the asset management plan and long-term financial plan with, and I'm assuming some amendments, Killaheggy Richards, Boncher Valley. So with that, we'll move to discussion, and Mr. Burke. Yeah.
thank you. So just to point out, in my original, a few weeks ago when I had sent out the PowerPoint to County Council, I had requested that because it's a little bit of work to show different options, if you had something you wanted to see worked into the plan, please let me know and I'll work it out. So I've got 3 requests of what different things we could do in the plan. The first request was, well, what would it take to keep us at a PCI of 70 instead of dropping down to 60? I don't want my roads to degrade. I want to stay at the standard we're at. So in the extreme short term, it's going to require $5 million in 2025 and 2026 to be added back into the plan, which of course means that if all things being equal, we would be out of money in 2027. So to accommodate the strategy, which is doable, we could carry on with the plan as presented, but we'd have to have a checkpoint in 2026 to decide where we're at. You know, there could be a lot of variables that would enable us to do that, but we definitely have to check in before we ran out of money. So that's option 1, is we carry on, we add an extra $5 million back into the plan in 2025 and 2026. And in 2026, we have to take another really hard look at the plan. And at that point, if a correction is required, it's going to be a bigger correction than is required now, right? As the longer this goes on, the more sharp the change has to be to make up the difference. That's option 1. Option 2 was specific to extending the debt repayment on certain assets that have longer lives, like bridges, which have a longer life than a road. And could we extend the debt repayment plan used to finance those bridges? And we certainly could. So if we extend the debt repayment period on our bridges and culverts in the plan from 10 years to 15 years, the total debt servicing costs in the 10-year plan would be reduced from $48 million to $46, so $2 million less paid over the 10 years. But of course, over the life of the loans, we would pay more interest, about $750,000 more in interest. Exactly the same calculation you would go through for financing a car. You know, you got the 5-year term and the 7-year term. Well, the 7-year term, you pay less each month, but over the life of the loan, you're going to pay a lot more. It's doable. Depends on your circumstance. Option 3 was around that $4 million project debenture limit. So what happens if we decrease that limit and debenture more projects? You'll recall that under the existing asset management plan, that debenture projects is anything greater than $3 million. So we were planning to jump to 4. If I go to 3.5 million, it would add 13 projects. So there's quite a jump in the number of projects and require an additional proceeds of $50 million. So it would double our debt load just by decreasing that limit $500,000. Debt servicing would rise from $48 million over the 10-year plan to $99 million, so doubling their debt servicing costs. And our annual repayment limit would be just fine. Of course, we're not near that, but our debt servicing as a percentage of total revenue would move from the low risk area creeping up towards that into the moderate risk area. So again, there's a little bit of a higher risk there, and we'd use some of our debt capacity. So those were the three options I was asked to contemplate. Each of them is doable. Certainly option 2 with extending the life on bridges is the least impactful, but also impactful in a negative way too. It's eminently doable. Option 3 with the increased debt load is somewhat concerning with the outstanding BCA study. And we don't know what that will tell us, but one of the things it could tell us is that we have to begin to take out mortgages and reconstruct housing units wholesale. And that would just be further increasing the debt load. Again, I don't have a crystal ball, I don't know that, but it's certainly one of the options that we may not want to load up on debt in our existing plan because there's a BCA study coming that may recommend we divert debt into that area. And option 1 is a little bit of play it as it, see as we go along, see what happens. But it does involve us generating a plan that shows us running out of money. It's a little bit of a concern there. And with that, Warden, that concludes my presentations.
Hey, thank you. Questions, comments? Member from Petawawa, then McNabb-Braeside.
Thank you, Warden, and through you, just before we contemplate the three options, could we get some comments from the operations department? I don't want to say they treat the roads like their own children, but they're the ones that drive on them and have a vested interest. So I just want to get a feeling of what they think of going from 72 to 60 with the PCI.
Mr. Hanrath?
Thank you, Warden. Through you to the councillor from the town of Petawawa. So as we discussed back, I believe it was in November, whenever we discussed the 10-year plan and what our strategy would be for rehabilitating our roads, we're not going to go with the worst first model. We'd follow our best practices, which means we would do asphalt overlays, surface sealers, and those types of treatments at the right time for that asset to keep our good road assets in good condition longer. Where we would see a big change is the screen isn't the greatest example of this, but where we'd see a big change is in our poor condition roads. We wouldn't be going in and doing a pulverize and pave whenever the PCI is at the 40-ish range. It'd probably happen at the 30 or the 20 range. So what you're seeing on the screen is a PCI of 60. That would be our average target, but that would be because our bad roads have gotten worse, but our good roads would be maintained in that regard, if that makes sense.
Okay, supplementary, and then I'll add Aaron Pryor behind McNabb.
Yeah, thank you. So I understand what you're saying, but could you comment on that from a safety standpoint in terms of our drivers that are on those roads?
Through you, Warden, to the councillor from the town of Petawawa. The standpoint we take on it is we can't allow assets like bridges or culverts to deteriorate to a point that they're past a certain condition state. However, for roads, you can accommodate a poor condition road and maintain it in a safe condition. You may have to reduce speed limits, you may have to do increased maintenance, but you can still safely accommodate traffic on a poor condition road.
Thank you. McNabb-Braeside and then Aaron Pryor.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for clarifying a number of things all in succinct fashion. What I'm hearing is, with all the variabilities that you've noted, you just have to look at it in a year-by-year, case-to-case basis, but we have to take a hard look at 2026. And if we're out of reserves, then, then that's fairly serious. But my question is, the other variability that I'm not sure how this fits into this is on the plus side, we do have these surpluses. We're not really budgeting for any. Operating surpluses go into reserves. So we'll find out each year what the reserve is and then make an adjustment on the 10-year plan. Is that basically what we're looking at? But we can't say right now that we're going to have any sort of operating surplus?
Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Warden. So if I can get my clicker to advance along. There we go. Yeah. So what we're suggesting is that each budget cycle would involve an exercise that looks identical to this. See where we're at for the year, where we think we're going to end our capital reserves because we have possibly surpluses, and we can see that, we can guess what that is a lot better towards the end of the year, and then account for other variables. So just to give you the example, in the first 5 months of this year, we have heard that the first kind of big funding, let me go back to my funding. So we have heard that OPI and COCHI funding will not be made available to us, and then we heard that it would be made available to us. We have heard of substantial gains made inside of long-term care and the per diems and other items. And, there's substantial other changes. And that's 5 months. There are 120 months in this plan. There is no conceivable way that we will know what is going to happen by the end. All we can say is that we will take the best guess we can get at the beginning. We know we have to get more money because things are more expensive. And we'll work through what we think we're going to do and go from there. That's really all the plan is, and I appreciate that's not much of a plan. It's not thou shall increase your levy by 3% every year and retain only 2.5% in operations. It is a significantly more flexible baseline plan. But that seems to be the world we live in, that there are a great many more changes coming at us. We're in rapid fire from the higher level of governments than perhaps there were in the past.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we'll move to Armpire, please.
Thank you, Warden. Back to Public Works and our colleague from Petawawa. With our new technology in the way of roads with these microfiber, whatever it was called, the road should last longer, and therefore we save money we're not going to be going back to that road in 5 years. We'll go back there in 15 years, so our budget can expand on that road per se. Am I correct in that?
Mr. Hamrath?
Thank you, Warden. Through you to the councillor from the town of Armpire. So the reference to the microfiber or the SAMI treatment that we're currently using, currently it's an alternative to microsurfacing. It would add, in theory, 10 years onto the service life of the road, which is already taken into consideration when building our 10-year plan. Our hope is that it lasts longer, but right now, conservatively, we're assuming it'd be comparable with microsurfacing.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions, comments? Member from Amherst Bromley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Both options 2 and 3 were options that I brought forward to Mr. Burke and Mr. Kelly. Thank them. We had a very comprehensive discussion and deliberation, and they are before us here. As Mr. Burke had noted, option 2 doesn't have a substantial change. It's reducing the servicing costs overall. The extra interest is certainly eating up some of that gain, but it is at least extending some of the financial requirement. I understand option 3 does carry with it some enormously small. Even on the charting, you can see that it goes a point above low risk as the FIR perceives risk to us. On the whole, I don't know that's making a substantial difference. Ultimately, the one thing that we discussed that I think it's probably more germane to the AMP than it is to the long-term financial plan, but largely what has driven us to all of these discussions about our long-term financial plan is the substantial increase that we experienced in costs, primarily in public works, though right across the corporate entity. But we are seeing this year some reduction. And almost much like in January when we were adopting the budget, the very first tender we had in was substantially over budget, but we've established some substantial savings from the much reduced cost of asphalt itself that we had been anticipated at the start of the year. Where I'm going with this is, so in November, it was at $413 million, and then we're going to lower our PCI target to say $45 million, and now we're back to 404 since November. And I understand the challenge, that there is inescapable challenge. If we were projecting this over 2 years, there's a great deal of uncertainty. This is 10 years. And if we're out by 5% on $404 million, that's a lot of money on a projection over 10 years. So one of the conversations that Mr. Kelly and Mr. Burke and I had was the sensitivity, and where is that? Just bear with me here. I'm trying to find the page. There it is. Page 26 of today's report, you'll see the asset management plan, and it has the projection right across. And as I understand it, I think these are uninflated costs. They are in current dollars only. But ultimately, the sensitivity of this thing is driving so much of what we're doing that had recommended that we give consideration to having like a global average, and I don't think it would be over the 10 years. Even 5 might be too much. There would be an appropriate sensitivity, but I'm thinking 3%, and the reason for that is to smooth some of the changes. And I recognize that, that is going to have an impact on reserves. The reserves are the cushion that we have available to us that's keeping us from having a soaring tax levy one year and then perhaps reducing our levy the next year, because largely this is being driven by this chart at the top of page 26. So I think that would behoove us to change our approach to how we are incorporating this. It was an interesting chart that Mr. Burke had put up there, and I don't know what page that was. I think it was the 2014 reserve balance with a green line, and I had suggested that one. Suggested Mr. Burke. I was not familiar with that one, but that one was contained in the original 2014 asset management plan. However, the original 2014 asset management plan had that based on a 2.28% annual levy increase. We're talking about substantially more than that. However, in the end, that we are more explicitly in this presentation, and I'm assuming writing right into the narrative of the long-term financial plan, that there is much more openness on variance from the plan. The plan is the benchmark, the baseline moving forward, because ultimately, Council probably will recall the charts that I brought forward, I think in the preparation of the 2023 budget, where we were likewise 10 years ago, or almost 10 years ago now, that our reserves, our capital reserves are going to fall to $2 million, and they did nothing but go up. So I recognize that. I think in answer to Councillor McKenzie's question, I believe we're already kind of budgeting for a surplus, since we're budgeting to have an automatic transfer into TCA. And of course, until such time as the Algonquin Trail is completed, we kind of have an open resolution on surplus monies. But it has been our experience, it has been my experience over the entire time that I've sat in this room, that every year we have exceeded our forecast closing capital reserve balance by almost 50% each and every year. I get that it is a challenge to incorporate that into a plan, but that's why it's imperative that we don't view this plan as a sacrosanct map that we shall follow moving forward, that when we are experiencing variance from this, that we incorporate that into the plan. So with that, that's the last comment, Mr. Warden, and I recognize that AMP and long-term financial plan must by necessity be divorced from operations, but ultimately where they come together is in the levy that we prepare at budget time, and that is the thing that is giving me very much pause as we're moving forward, because while it is not explicit in any slide here, inescapably, unavoidably written in between the lines here is these things have a pretty substantial impact on our levy over the next 10 years.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments, questions? Member from Whitewater.
Yeah, two, Warden, please, if I could. And just Councillor Donoghue highlighted page 26, the asset management plan. And I just want to make sure it's clear in my mind. The proposed dollar figures that are for investment in these capital assets each year is either driven by saving as much money as possible over the year, i.e. keeping the vehicle at the, as an example of a vehicle, keeping it at its, where it doesn't become more costly to maintain it than to replace it. The roads, bridges, this is all being driven by establishing a current standard. I just wanted to make sure, so that's my first assumption. When we talk about the new insertion of the $13 million to support the trails, the bridges in particular, what standard are we using for that recreational park? Is it similar to any other bridge standard, or have we adopted one unique for a linear park?
Mr. Henrath.
Thank you, Warden. Through you to the councillor from Whitewater Region. In the case of trail bridges, it'd be on a case-by-case basis. There are some trail bridges that we still have designed to accommodate full highway loading, but that's only in the case where it'd be a wide detour to get maintenance equipment around the bridge, where there's possibility to get from one end to the bridge to the other with a relatively low impact detour with our maintenance equipment. We would design them to be a trail bridge to accommodate a groomer as the largest equipment that would go across it. So there is a lower standard in some, but for others they would have to be designed to a highway standard.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Thanks, Warden. Yeah, no, that's perfect. So I just wanted to make sure that was the only area I wasn't sure on, so thank you. And then the next question I pose to Mr. Burke, if that's okay, Warden. And it's just based on what I'm seeing now, and if we go back to the slide where you kind of do all the plus and minuses, right now we're suggesting we need about a 7.5% levy increase next year, based on 5.22 for the asset management plan and the typical 2.2, 2.3 for operations. What we don't know now is what are all the other pluses and minuses, which we won't know until we get closer to the end of the year. And we don't know if there is any improvement, growth-supported development that would add on to that. But essentially, by adopting this plan, we are acknowledging that we're probably in that 7 to 7.5 range for levy growth.
Yes, I mean, I think we can look a little bit ahead and see some positives here, like the lower tender prices that are coming in. I think we're going to have some surplus just based on the lower tender prices. But let's say it's not all bleak, but it's not that great. No, it's going to be yeah, a 7% levy, yeah, that's sort of the order of magnitude we would be ballparking in this plan. It's a lot. It's substantial.
Okay, thank you. So not seeing any more questions. Member
Sorry, just a question on process. So we've viewed 3 options in addition to the plan that has been compiled by Mr. Burke. What is the approach to those 3 options? Do we want to deal with those individually? I would defer to the warden.
My suggestion is it's a motion on one of the options. We left it open, and it would just be an amendment to add option 1, 2, or 3. Motion to amend. Thanks.
So I can help out the word. So right now, if I can, Warden, I mean, the motion on the table is that approve the asset management plan and long-term financial plan with the following amendments. That was the motion that's currently on the floor. And then it would behoove you to have an amending motion to select an option. That amendment will be voted on, or that option will be voted on. And then the original motion will be as amended with that option included, and then so be it.
Sorry, to verify, so the intent was the resolution with the wording parenthetically as amended. It is not the default, the null right now is not to approve this resolution with these changes. It is now to give consideration whether council wishes to incorporate any of those changes.
Through you, Warden, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. I would certainly make a resolution on option number 2. It seems that one seems to be a substantial improvement to, I shouldn't say that, it is probably an incremental improvement. But I think when we start talking about the levy increases that my colleague from Whitewater is talking about, if I can find something even to the right of the decimal point, it is worth finding. So I would move that option 2 be incorporated.
Thank you. Seconder from Bone Shore Valley.
And if I may, Mr. Warden, I agree with my colleague from Romney. I think that, my colleague from Whitewater and I were just saying option 1 and 3 seem like non-starters, but option 2 definitely could move the decimal point a little bit. And I think that we just hope, amongst all hopes, that we have good growth as we did this year, and we're able to mitigate that 7.5%, which we know that people just can't afford right now. So thank you.
Thank you. And I see a member from Deep River.
Thank you, Warden. Just a comment, and I think the member from Bone Shore Valley kind of almost just said it, but let's not look at all of this as doom and gloom, because we could always see $100 million worth of real growth, new assessment come into the county in, I don't know, the next 3 years. Who knows? So that's my happy place.
Do you have room? Thank you. So with that, is there any other comments, questions, concerns? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? None. It's carried. Thank you, Council. So with that, we'll go with the original motion as amended. Okay, seeing no comments or questions. All those in favor? Opposed? None. It's carried. Thank you. And now we'll move to bylaws, which is that the bylaw listed on item 9, bylaw 7624 on the special county council agenda dated May 16th, 2024, be deemed read 3 times and passed. Mover, please. I see Brudenell Lindock Raglan, second. North Agona Wilberforce. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? None. It's carried. Thank you. And the confirmatory bylaw, that the bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the County of Renfrew at the meeting held on May 16th, 2024, be now numbered, deemed read 3 times and passed. That's bylaw number 77-24. Mover, please. I see Horton and Madawaska Valley. Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? None. It's carried. Thank you. And I would accept a motion to adjourn. Member from Abbotston Bromley and the member from McNabb Braeside. Discussion? No discussion? That's good news. And thank you very much for your patience, and to the staff. This was a very challenging series of questions that we had to try and get some closure on, so I appreciate your attention. And I recognize you have to go home and feed your horses or dogs, whatever. All those, yeah, so anyway, we're adjourned. All those in favor? Opposed? None. It's carried. Thank you.